Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to today's second half. Well, we are going to stay on that same path. Dogman and kind of crawler encounters in national parks. Before we do that, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe and click the like button. It's fast and free. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's second half. Shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm from a cattle and sheep ranch in Montana. I also have 4 saddle horses. The ranch that my cousin and I own is about 4,700 acres, consisting of flat crop and hay fields, stretching on both sides of the Yellowstone River. The ranch is located miles 11 northeast of the town of Savage. We rent a ranch that's 38 miles upriver from us. This is where the incident occurred. The leased ranch is huge, comprising over 13,000 acres. The folk that own it are multimillionaires from Oregon who only visit a few times a year. The ranch has very rough terrain and 3 small creeks running through it. On the very northwest corner of the land, it flattens out, and there's an old corral system. There's also a long vacant house nearby, a drawer. We had leased this ranch since the mid-2000s and had no trouble until about 5 years ago. It's normal to lose a few cows in the Yellowstone, but we lost 130 since 2016. We lost 17 cows the year that my horse was killed. Around half of these cattle we were able to locate. The animals that we found were pretty eaten up by coyote, but a few we found were not. These carcasses looked a lot like other cattle mutilations, with the skin around the eyes, the ears, and the udder completely missing. It was highly unusual to lose this many cattle, as they were at home throughout the winter, and there were no natural predators for them in eastern Montana, especially one that could kill a full-grown cow. All of the cattle that went missing were cows, and always between 3 and 5 years old. This event took place at the end of June of last year. We had trucked the cattle to the ranch 2 weeks prior, and I was checking on them that day. Usually my cousin or his son rode out with me, but they were moving the irrigation pivot that day, so I was alone. I parked my pickup next to the corral and unloaded my horse. This was about 9:30 in the morning. My horse's name was Ace. He was a very large horse that weighed a whole ton and stood 19 hands tall. He was a quarter perch-on. Ace was not very quick or fast, but he had great endurance, and you could ride him all day through the roughest country, and he didn't tire. It was a pretty usual day until about 1 p.m. when I saw something that just didn't belong. About a mile away, I could see an animal bounding up a hill. My initial reaction was a deer, because it was about as big as one, but had the proportions more like a mountain lion. I tried to ride closer to whatever it was, but I couldn't find it. It was odd, but not that crazy, so I just put the thought in the back of my head. The day continued normally until I returned to my pickup and trailer. As I went to load Ace, I noticed that the rear axle of the trailer had come apart. Keep in mind that I had not used it till earlier that morning, so there was no reason for that to happen. It was getting pretty late, around 8 o'clock at night. And it took about an hour and a half to get back to the house, so I decided to leave Ace in the trailer there and take the pickup home. The corral fence was all right, but the gate latch was rusted shut to where you couldn't close it. I had a roll of barbed wire in the pickup, so I used that to secure the gate after putting Ace into it. As I drove home, I noticed a few large lights in the opposite direction from the corral. They resembled combine lights, even though they were farther apart and brighter. Also, there would be no reason for a combine to be up here. I arrived home at about 10:30 without having any trouble. The next morning, my cousin, his son, and I all rode up together to fix the axle and get Ace back. When we finally got to the corral, we saw that Ace wasn't there. The wire holding the gate shut had not been meddled with, so there was no logical way that he could have escaped. The corral had not been used in decades, so there was some grass growing inside, but that day the grass was all turned up, and you could see where Ace had run around for a while. This was quite unusual, as Ace was always quite the calm horse. We looked for him the whole day and could not find him, but we were severely limited because of the fact that we were on foot. The next day, myself and my cousin's son returned with a fixed trailer and 2 horses to continue the search for Ace. I had also brought my dog Daisy. We split up to cover more ground, and every 2 hours we'd meet up. At around 3 in the afternoon, while I was riding around the rim of a steep wooded draw, Daisy suddenly scurried down into the draw. I tied the horse I was riding, Penny, to an old cedar tree and followed Daisy down. The sides of this draw were incredibly steep, and I was struggling to make it down there on foot. For a horse as big as Ace, it would have been completely impossible. As I got to the bottom, I could smell something dead, and I immediately knew it was Ace. He had not been touched by predators, but was heavily mutilated. He had the same mutation as cows, with the skin around their eyes being gone, as well as the skin around their lips. However, his back legs were completely free of flesh and was just bone. His rib cage was also opened up, with all of his organs being gone. As I looked around, I could see the skeletons of at least 3 cows, and it was obvious that this was some type of dumping ground for whatever did this. I was completely dumbfounded on what had happened. There was no way that Ace could have gotten here by himself, so he must have had to have been carefully placed here. I'd also like to mention that where he was found was a whole 2 miles away from the corral. Nothing was adding up, and besides, I had just lost my favorite horse. I sadly returned to the spot where me and my cousin's son were going to meet up, and we both rode back to the pickup. After talking to my cousin, we decided not to renew our lease. Our current lease will expire in 2022. My cousin's son spends a lot of time on the internet and thought it sounded very similar to what happened at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. For the past months, I've been studying what happened, but have been unable to come up with a definitive answer. Today's second encounter. I'm sure people laugh when they hear stories like this, but I can't. I was face to face with what I can only describe as a werewolf in 1987 in southern Illinois. I was only 10, but I know what big dogs looked like, and I actually owned a huge St. Bernard at the time. This thing dwarfed him. I was walking alone down a road that parallels some thick woods when I heard some movement in the brush. I had stopped and looked toward the noise, and to my absolute horror, a huge black wolf-looking head came out of the brush and was looking at me. I don't know if it was on 2 or 4 legs, but it was taller than I was. I was 10, so maybe 4.5 feet or so. Suddenly it came bursting out of the woods towards me, and I thought I was dead. I don't know what happened at that point, but obviously it didn't grab me. All I can remember from that part is that it was in my face, and then it wasn't. My mom remembers seeing me running home with a look of terror, so she met me outside. She knew something bad had happened, but didn't know what. She says I was shaking uncontrollably. I had wet myself, and I kept saying, "A werewolf just tried to take me." She says that she doesn't know what I encountered, but I was a tough kid who always was outside and was not prone to making up stories. She said the next day I brought a book home from school titled Meet the Werewolf and became obsessed with anything werewolf related. I wouldn't go outside for a long time after that, even when all the other kids were outside. We moved the next year to a city 100 miles away, and I got back to normal again. I moved back to the same rural town when I was 18, and I've lived here since. It's a small town on Rend Lake in Jefferson County, Illinois. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget its face. This wasn't a dog. I go into the woods quite a bit alone, and sometimes I get a bit worried, but I also always carry a gun just in case. Be safe when alone in rural areas because these Dogman things are real. My late wife had a daytime encounter with what she called a 7-foot black werewolf standing on 2 legs in 2001, just about 5 miles from where I had my encounter. The only difference is that she was driving and had the relative safety of being in a car. It proved to me that they do exist and are in the area, so at least I know to be careful when in the woods instead of being like everyone else who doesn't have a clue until they are face to face with one. It's scary to know they are real, but I think it's better to be aware of them, so I know to take precautions when I'm in the woods. And I tell anyone who will listen despite being laughed at by some. But those who know me best know that I'm not crazy, and that I don't make up stories, so they believe me. I think telling them will keep them out of harm's way, or at least make them a little more cautious about being out there alone. My uncle had a Sasquatch encounter in '81 while in the outskirts of the Shawnee National Forest. He never went back and is afraid to be outside after dark, if there are any woods around. He's 60 now and still scared of things that don't exist. He's a huge guy himself, but is terrified of seeing that thing again. Funny thing is he actually laughed at me when I told him about my werewolf-looking thing. That almost got me. I think that he had thought I was joking at first, but I told him, just like Bigfoot that you imagined, and he changed his tune. He said it was probably a Bigfoot that I saw. It was most certainly not. It was a giant black wolf that was taller than me, not a gorilla-looking thing. Today's third encounter. I was traveling in the dark at work, and I'm on a military base in a gated area where it's pitch black except for a single light post near the gate. I need to go outside to smoke. A wolf-like creature that was pitch black walked directly under the light so I could see it fully. I thought, cool, looks like a fox because of its thick black tail, but then I realized it's around the size of a wolf with really thin legs and a lot of hair hanging down its neck and tail. Its tail was dragging about a foot behind it. It stopped and turned its head slowly towards me, and all I saw was these shiny white eyes staring through me. I couldn't move until it looked away and did a 180 and went back into the shadows to where I couldn't see it. I slowly approached to go out to the gate. It had disappeared after I got outside the gate and locked it. I lit my cigarette and started smoking and decided to turn on my phone's flashlight and scan the fence line where it had gone. The area it had disappeared was a lot shorter than I originally thought, and the gate I went out only had about 20 feet before there was another gate cutoff area. The creature had disappeared, so while I was scanning slowly, I saw nothing, but heard a whistle that sounded like it had come from not too far directly in front of me through the gate. I slowly backed up and got to my car. I have no idea what this thing was, what the whistle meant. Last I checked, there's no dog I know that's full black with long dragging tail that whistles in the middle of the night on a military base. Today's fourth encounter. In 1999, I was working at a state park in Pennsylvania, and I got to know the back areas of it pretty well, the areas most tourists didn't get to see. Approximately 1 mile from the park on a long dirt road was a large clearing in the woods, which was cleared for power lines and gas well use. Once you got out to that spot, you'd have to walk over a long hill until you came to an old abandoned trail. If you followed this trail, it would take you deep into the forest. One day I followed it and found that it led to an old dilapidated cabin, not on the park cabin records, and it looked like it hadn't been used in many decades. Even though it was daylight, I still got this creepy feeling that I shouldn't be there, and worse, that something was watching every move I made. A few weeks later, while I was off duty, 2 of my friends and myself were just out driving around enjoying the summer night, and since I knew all the back roads, I was taking them on kind of a tour. Note, none of these roads are off limits or secret, so I wasn't breaking any rules. Other than that mysterious cabin, the park hasn't had any secrets. About 11 p.m., I came to that familiar clearing. I had mentioned something about an old cabin. Being a brave soul, I talked them into letting me show them the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight, and we took off down the hill and onto the path that led to the cabin. I took the lead and we walked halfway when all of a sudden my light flashed on something on the right side of the path. Almost immediately I stopped and said, "Did you guys see that?" To which they responded, "See what?" As I panned the light back to the right side of the road, I said, "That." There, standing by a tree, was a creature only seen in sci-fi movies. It had grayish olive-colored skin and was very thin in its extremities. The calves and forearm muscles were very large, as well as its chest. Its face was the strangest thing, since it had a typical alien gray head shape, but there was no mouth. It had a nose that was long and thin, but not longer than its chin. Its eyes were a reddish gleam in the light, but not the size of most reported aliens. Very small, even by human standards. I hate to make this reference for fear of questioning my sanity, but the best description I have is the goons that were in the Popeye cartoon. It leaned oddly against the tree, like if you were leaning on an armchair by only one arm. To make another TV show reference, but like the Fonz would lean on the jukebox in Happy Days, minus the legs being crossed. Immediately, everybody wanted to leave, but as we turned, my flashlight went out. My friends told me to quit messing with them and turned the light back on, to which I informed them that I wasn't messing with them and to keep moving now that I was at the back of the group. I frantically continued to beat my flashlight, trying to get it to work again. As soon as it came back on, I immediately swiveled back around to shine behind us. The creature had moved up significantly and was now on the left-hand side. We hurried up to the clearing, and once we got back up the hill into the main dirt road, things got worse. Out of the woods we had just come through was this high-pitched, blood-curdling screech noise, which, after it started, others started to answer back from the other side of the clearing. The fact that I was a park ranger, had been in the woods all my life, and had a degree from Penn State in wildlife management means I've heard a lot of noises in the wild, but have never heard a sound like that before. I know it was not any kind of owl, bobcat, bear, bird, porcupine. You get the drift. Once I told my dad about the encounter. He told me it could have been a chupacabra, which I had never heard of before, and as far as aliens go, never believed in them until recently. Months went by without incident. Other than not being able to shake that "I'm watching you" feeling, I was to the point of feeling like I was being stalked. One night I went out to get something for my truck when I looked into the woods and saw those reddish, glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I immediately ran into the house and grabbed the biggest knife. I'm not a gun guy. To which my dad asked me what I was doing. I told him I was tired of feeling stalked and was going to face this thing. He told me that he was coming with me, but all along I knew he never truly believed me or my encounter. When we got outside, he nonchalantly asked, "Okay, where did you see this thing?" and I pointed to the spot to which he directed his flashlight, much to his disbelief. There it was, and as soon as the light hit it, tore off into the deep woods. My dad, an ex-Marine who served proudly during Vietnam, yelled at me to get back into the house with fear in his voice. To this day, it still creeps me out telling the encounter, and my hands shake even while I'm typing this to recall it. I'm now in my 30s with a wife and kids, but even now, when I go outside at night, I still feel watched to the point that when I get a really strong feeling, my wife won't let me leave the house without her. Just as a side note, for the first 5 years of our relationship, she too would catch sight of this creature, but mostly as it was going into the shadows. As a further note, if anyone is questioning it, there is no drugs, alcohol, or any other substance involved during this or any other encounter I've had. All right, guys, just a shorter little kind of second half for tonight. I've got to work on the interview that I got today with Paul Pedersen. And let me tell you something. This is one heck of a good interview. You guys are going to be blown away. Really nice guy, really cool guy, full of information. He's been studying cryptids for, 30, 40 years. And just a really fun interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So with that, I want to thank everybody for all the support, and may the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may he guide us down that path that we call life.